What is the absolute worst game you ever played? Maybe you thought of a game that was disappointing, or maybe you thought of a game that is filled with bugs and glitches. Although a few games I personally don't really like came to mind, I decided to find the definitive answer. I found a list of the top 100 lowest rated games on Steam, and I'm going to play them all to find out which game I personally think is the worst. Now, let's spin the wheel and get ready to go dumpster diving. Deus Ex The Fall? Let's get right into it. There's a couple of things that might be helpful to know before we get into the gameplay itself. First, this game is a mobile port of sorts. The game originally released on the iOS store in June of 2013, and that version has mixed but mostly decent scores. The version that we're playing today released on Windows in March of 2014 to notably lower scores. Another thing to note is that Deus Ex The Fall is a spin-off from the main series. Originally, it was meant to be an episodic series of games, however, that never happened. So I will give the game a little bit of leeway in regards to unresolved plot points. Anyway, time for the actual game. The first thing I notice is that the game has a built-in Facebook option in the menu, and although that looks really enticing, I'm not a grandmother who desperately needs help in Farmville, so I'm gonna pass. Instead, I load into a new save and we get a cutscene with surveillance of the different countries and notable events that happened here. Since I'm not caught up in my Deus Ex lore, the only thing I can gather is that the corporations are testing on people in Panama. Then we get over 2 minutes of the most cliche dialogue I've heard in a game in a long time. First, we get the news broadcast that gives us the convenient backstory. In the Deus Ex world, people with cybernetics have to take a drug called neuroposine, or however you pronounce it, consistently, or they can seize up and die. The sole company who produces neuroposine is having trouble keeping up with demand, so our main characters Anna and Ben must find an alternative source to keep themselves from dying. Oh yeah, and they're also on the run from some mysterious group. Who, you may ask? No idea, because even though Anna repeatedly calls Ben by his name, every other mention of the bad guys or something along the lines of, "You know they're out there looking for us," and "Tell me about him." Then we get Ben walking to the window and staring sadly out as he recalls his entire tragic backstory. From how him and Anna talked, they both seemed like they were relatively close to each other, or at the very least they've been working together for a bit. So why did it take so long for her to go, "Oh yeah, weren't you working for the Tyrants, the exact same organization who's trying to kill us?" What's up with that? Now it's time for Ben's super long backstory, which also acts as a tutorial of sorts. After having to walk behind the slowest moving NPC in my life, we get to some confusing tutorials narrated by a very robotic sounding voice.
Use the mouse to align the crosshair with your enemies. Use the left mouse button to fire your weapon.
I am SpongeTron.
There's two kinds of takedowns, a noisy lethal and a silent non-lethal. I don't know how the non-lethal is considered quiet, but hey, whatever. Speaking of being silent, the stealth in this game is rather terrible. I have a feeling that the game wants to be like the Metal Gear series where you sneak around all over the place hiding from enemies, but when your main character crouching behind some boxes looks like a dad trying to play hide and seek with his 2-year-old and the cover transfer mechanic makes you easily spotted, I honestly don't feel very stealthy. It gets even worse later on when you get a silencer for your rifle, so, wanting to utilize your newfound ranged options, you try to shoot this guard. The first issue is that you cannot aim down the sights with most weapons unless you're actively shooting them. The second issue is that if you shoot someone with a rifle, they don't immediately die. They do, however, immediately alert everyone around you, so you lose the element of surprise. And there isn't any way to distract the guards either, so it's often difficult to break up groups of enemies. Also, remember those takedowns I talked about earlier? Those take up energy as shown by the batteries at the top of the screen. The energy takes a long time to recharge, so sometimes you can't even do a takedown and instead get this annoying noise. At the end of the level, we meet up with the guy who supposedly killed our entire team on a mission gone wrong. Since I pretty much immediately figured out that he was being set up, and honestly I also wanted to try to screw up the story as much as possible, I tried to capture him, but a teammate killed him instead and the screen went blank. See, this annoyed me a lot. There's a couple times where the game outright says that there's often more than one solution to a given problem, but then in the very first case where that dialogue could matter, instead the choice is made for you. You can't keep saying how open-ended the game is, and yet force the first major choice to be worthless. The next mission shows you aboard the Tyrant's plane, which, by the way, is the most stupid name for an evil group since the Legion of Doom, and to be honest, not much happens. I walk over and piss off a guy named Barrett, who gets so angry that he has to stop and gesture towards the camera, and I even get an achievement called Piss Off Barrett. I then confront the leader of the Tyrants who, surprise, was the actual person who killed my entire team before cinematically jumping off the plane and plummeting to the ocean below. Oh yeah, and see all the company names going by when he's falling? You know how a title card like that usually happens after the prologue to show that a game is just now starting, like in the beginning of Breath of the Wild? Yeah, this game is already a third of the way over. But back to the current time, Anna is having seizures, so we need to go to Panama to meet Alvarez, someone who can get us an alternative to neuroposine so we don't kick the bucket. This is where a majority of the game takes place, and to be honest, the gameplay cycle gets pretty tedious. You go to somebody, talk to them, and then they end up telling you have to go to somebody else. And every once in a while, you get to sneak around and shoot bad guys. You can also pretty much just do whatever you want. There were a couple of guards standing around that I did take takedowns on to get experience, snuck around in vents that lead absolutely nowhere. Then I just took out a drug den because I was bored. To be honest, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing in here, so I just went around and killed literally every single person before I got bored and left. I finally found the doctor who injects me with some knockoff drugs before I somehow convince him to hand over a keycard by using pheromones like I'm some sort of ant. Outside, I get my first side quest. This woman wants me to find out what happened to her boyfriend, who she last saw in the drug den. Unfortunately for her, I already killed everyone in the den, so I might have accidentally killed him too. Oops. To be honest, I lost a lot of interest in the story at this point. I just kind of wandered around aimlessly from person to person, quest to quest. I met a military officer who needed my help before realizing I could do a takedown on him. Needless to say, I immediately failed that quest. I tried sneaking around in vents before immediately getting spotted and just shooting everyone. I had to go back to the drug den for a third time to get this stupid manifest that definitely wasn't there the first 2 times. But I think my favorite part of the whole game was watching the civilian dance. Just look at those moves. Michael Jackson would be jealous. Anyway, time for the home stretch. We make our way up to a hotel to protect a member of the United Nations before watching them get assassinated by Barrett. And despite him knowing who we are, us pissing him off the one and only time we really talk to him, and getting direct orders for him to kill us, for some reason he pauses for a second before the commander suddenly changes his mind and he keeps us alive. This makes literally no sense, but whatever. Our final goal is to make our way through an enemy base to disable the surveillance so we can board a VTOL and escape, and this part sucks for 3 reasons. First, unlike most other parts of the game, enemies here have a ton of health, meaning that sometimes you can unload several bullets into them and they can still kill you first. Second, there's something I haven't mentioned yet because of how boring it is. The hacking. Most doors have locks that require you to hack them to get past unless you have the code, which, much like in Wolfenstein Youngblood, can be found just randomly laying around. Hacking in this game is pretty boring. You just have to make a path from the blue orb to the green orb before the enemy makes a path from the red orb to the blue orb. But since you get so many tries and it's so easy to do, there's no stakes here. And half the time, even when you hack into a terminal, all you get is a note with a code to another terminal. Finally, there's no strategy required. Since the stealth mechanics aren't great, the best strategy is to just go gung-ho into battle. You might think that means that running out of ammo would be a big issue, but nope. At any time you can access a store and buy a gun, health consumable, or ammo that you need. Since I couldn't even save up for half of what I needed to buy the more expensive guns, I just spent all my money on ammunition and health so I could just mow everyone down. There's no difficulty here, and once you learn that you can basically buy whatever you need at any point, you're pretty much set. That is, unless you accidentally run to a mine head first like I do. Then, it's time for the final battle. I take out all the guards before finally facing the only big mech in the game. This is it. I've seen this robot in the trailers and promo images, so I am ready for an exciting boss fight. Oh man, I can't wait to see all of his super cool moves. Oh, I can just walk 5 paces and turn him off. Huh. Dutch. And the game's over. Cool. The entire game. Even though the game ended on a cliffhanger, I still felt like the plot was shallow. 2 drug addicts find their new plug before realizing that the largest business in a cyberpunk game is actually evil. That's pretty much it. At least we get a cool look at the statistics screen. Apparently I got an achievement for not killing anyone in part 1, even though it also shows that I got 61 kills. I ended up being Deus Ex in around 3 hours, and I can honestly say that it isn't worth the money. The entire experience felt more like a demo to a game than the actual finished product. Maybe it's the fact that the game was a mobile port from iOS, or maybe it's the fact that it was supposed to be an episodic series before it was cancelled. Either way, it just felt a lot more disappointing than I had hoped. That being said, I still did manage to beat the game, which automatically puts it above most of the other games on this list. Speaking of which, you may notice that the current rankings look a little bit different. I realized that before I was ranking all the games based on different criteria, so now I'm just going to rank the games based on my own personal preference. On one hand, I think Wolfenstein Youngblood is the best so far since it seems more harmless than actively bad. On the other hand, while I think Sniper Art of Victory is technically worse than Airport Simulator 2014, Sniper made me laugh at how bad it was, and Airport really made me want to do it this time. Anyway, I hope to see you all again next week. Peace out.